Welcome to the England Rugby Pod. Thanks for downloading episode 41, the Red Roses final against New Zealand, the Premiership opening weekend and the impact it's likely to have on the future England setup. You're listening to the England Rugby Pod, the rugby podcast that believes England will win the World Cup in 2019. Hey guys, welcome back. Firstly, apologies for the delay in getting this episode out to you. I know that we were obviously closely following the Red Roses throughout the World Cup, and comes down to the final, and we failed to get an episode out on time. Unfortunately, it is that time of year. I was away, then Dan was away. I was then away again, but we've managed to get together now, and I'm here with Dan, of course. Hi, mate.
Hi, Andy. It was. It's been a hectic sort of couple of weeks, hasn't it? Not really been able to sort of catch up, but we definitely haven't forgotten about our Red Roses and the sort of epic performance they put in throughout their whole World Cup.
Absolutely, and I think two big things. Obviously, we want to cover that, but also Premiership kicked off this weekend. I know we're not, with the England Rugby Pod, we're not here to cover all of the Premiership games, but I think it's okay to talk about the opening weekend. And I think as well, we're throughout this series, I think we're gonna look at the Premiership from an England perspective. So we'll certainly be following, the teams, the big performances from our England boys, and talking about the impact that's going to have on the England setup. So in that respect, I think we will cover some of the Premiership stuff.
Yeah, because hey, look, it's 1 week, it's one game, but the first round of games could potentially have some really interesting implications from a sort of England perspective, even not necessarily an elite player squad perspective, but certainly from a match day 23, it could really have some interesting repercussions should things go to form. But we won't get too carried away. It is still 1 week's worth of games. But let's go back and have a look at our Red Roses, who. What a tournament, and such a shame. It was just one step too far for them, which was unfortunate, but the All Blacks did deserve it. They really turned up, and the intensity they played with was outstanding.
Absolutely. I mean, look, it was a cracking game of rugby. Two sides that clearly are a class above the rest.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think New Zealand deserved the win on the day. They were just that little bit more kind of emphatic, or I don't know if that's the right word, but that seems like the right word.
So it sounds important word. So.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like we know what we're talking about. But it was 41-32. It was a high scoring game. You don't see many World Cup finals that score with high scoring final results. So, that's good to see. Lots of running rugby, tries from both sides. 1 minute you think that one team is in control, and then the next it switches. And so it was very back and forth, quite Southern Hemisphere style, I suppose. But, England led 17-10 at the half, and it felt like they had what it took to do the job. And unfortunately, as you say, New Zealand were just a little bit too much for them, in the end, and became rightful winners. But, I think you have to look back at the entire tournament and say, both of these sides, but we're here to talk about England. What a tournament! What a series of performances to put together to get to that point and be able to do that. And I know that they are, as we've said, a step above the rest of the competition. But nevertheless, you've still got to put these performances together week in, week out. In their case, twice a week throughout the tournament. And they did it with constantly changing sides. They didn't have one team. It wasn't even a 23. It was very much a squad effort, because the team changed pretty much with every single game, but the results didn't.
Yeah, it was what a performance by our women. Our women really did us proud, did themselves proud, and it showed, like you say, it showed real strength in depth. It showed that the program has been working. We're getting through some really talented sort of women's players. With regards to the final, I wonder whether actually one of the worst things we could have done was beat the All Blacks in the summer. Because to me, the difference was the All Blacks just had that level of physicality sort of that they were just that bit more physical than the England girls. They really came out and were really powerful. I mean, something we alluded to after the semi-finals that, England had a tougher one. Will that have taken a bit more out of them? Let's not use that as an excuse, but I think that might have been a factor. I mean, the All Blacks hadn't had to 100% turn up to the final, whereas England had. Certainly with regards to sort of France in the semis. Maybe it was a factor, maybe not. But either way, it was an absolute display of rugby. Skills-wise, I don't think there's much difference between the women and men. And bearing in mind that, the chances are the men have been playing, just due to the nature of the setup of rugby in this country, the chances are the men have been playing sort of rugby a lot longer and a lot more frequently. I think the women to play to the skill level they are is an absolute testament to the coaching that they received, because some of the skills are absolutely brilliant, spot on.
Absolutely, but if we're gonna find fault, and we do like to do this. We've done it with the men's in the rugby in the 2015 World Cup. The changes that they made, this is a team that was in charge. In the first half, the Red Roses. And then they made these changes, and they made them so early, and they basically took off all of their key players, the ones that were leading this charge, and in my opinion, it completely disrupted their momentum, and ultimately that cost them the game.
Yeah, I don't know the thinking behind that. I mean, that hasn't really been discussed in depth.
It felt a little, exactly. It just felt like it was sort of changes for the sake of changes. Oh, we've hit the 60-minute mark. We really must make some changes because that's what you do in rugby. And as we've shown with Eddie Jones and the way that he runs a team, you make the changes because you need to make the changes because your players have played themselves out. They're no longer putting in 100%, and so you want to bring on fresh legs, or of course injuries. But you make the changes tactically. You don't make the changes just for the sake of doing it. Everyone turned up. It's a World Cup final. Everyone should get a game. And that's I'm not sort of discrediting the people that came on, but the momentum is so important in big games. And if you take that momentum away simply for the sake of making changes, you can't really complain too much when, as a result of that, the opposition haven't done the same thing. Their momentum continues. Yours completely drops, and suddenly gaps open up and tries get scored. And it only takes a few moments for two tries to be run in, and suddenly there's a 14-point gap, and the game looks out of touch. So I feel sorry for them.
Yeah. Sorry, mate. I was going to say this is one of my issues with sort of the professional side of rugby, because I know Stuart Lancaster used to do it, because obviously they've all now got their they've all got their chips and whatever in their shirts. So the coaches at all point can monitor sort of how much they've run, the sort of heart rates, all that side of it. Heart rates, I'm not sure, but I think so. And they know from training, the coaches know, this player performs at optimum at this level for 60 minutes. So they've done that. Let's take them off. It doesn't take into account anything, like you say, the momentum of the game. It doesn't take into account the adrenaline of the World Cup final.
Yeah.
It doesn't take into account the human factor. And personally, and I've said this a long time, that's where I think Stuart Lancaster made a lot of mistakes. He would only look at things from a statistical perspective without taking that human factor into context. And I think that may have happened a bit. Would it have changed the result? I don't know. I think we probably have to say that the All Blacks just wanted it so much.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but I almost feel like that's discrediting the Red Roses, because it's sort of saying that they didn't want it as much, and I don't think that's the case. I think at the end of the day, it's two sides who we know that England can beat New Zealand. Throughout the tournament, I was talking about how England were number one in the world because, of course, just before the World Cup they were. But because they were number one and New Zealand were number two, the results that the two teams got during the World Cup in those early stages actually pushed New Zealand back up into the number one spot. So by the final, New Zealand were one in the world, England two. FYI, anyone who's interested.
I did not know that. That's good. That's good stats.
There you go. But yeah, I think they both wanted it. I think the England girls desperately wanted it. perhaps too much. Perhaps a little bit. The nerves came in because actually they were concentrating too much on how much they wanted it and not so much on the game plan. But I really think one of the biggest sort of negatives in that game was that decision to make those changes. All of a sudden, and in my opinion, at the wrong time. It's easy in hindsight. It always will be, and there's nothing we can do about it now. But if we're going to find fault and back up the girls and say, oh, well, it wasn't their fault, they could have done it, then that's my reason.
Yeah, and like you say, and it's something, and it's definitely a point. It's definitely a valid point. But overall, I just think we need to say that girls, you what an epic tournament, what epic performances you put in, your dedication. There's been a lot going on in the background, something you and me have covered a hell of a lot. But they didn't let that distract them. They still played their best rugby. And yeah, they were unlucky, but they completely did themselves proud. What I found interesting, actually, one of the things at the end, Katie McLean, when she was interviewed, was, yes, you could tell the girls were devastated about sort of the result. But also Katie McLean really made a point of saying, we now need to look to the future of England women's rugby. It still feels like we're taking a backward step, and I just don't get it. And I don't want to keep boring each other because we bring this up every time, but it does, to an extent, to me feel like, wow, look what these women have achieved. Look at the rugby they're playing. Look how proud they do us. And it does feel to an extent now that we're taking a backward step from an England rugby perspective. I know there's investment and potentially looking at new leagues and the sort of cross-country leagues to help the game. And I'm sure all that will help. But purely from an England perspective, like the England rugby team, which is obviously what we're about, it feels like we're taking a backward step, and that's ridiculous.
I agree, and actually, stats from the final, which obviously aired on ITV, 2.6 million, more than 2.6 million people tuned in to watch that final.
Oh, awesome!
Which is incredible, and from if the RFU are saying, "Oh, there's not enough money in it," the support isn't there. Well, have a look at the stats, because 2.6 million people tuned in to watch that game on ITV. And you can bet that most of them weren't New Zealanders, given that ITV is an English channel. So
yeah, and that's a Saturday night.
On a Saturday night, exactly. So I think you have to. I really hope it makes them take note, because, like you say, it seems criminal to simply cut the funding, because I don't. We've said it before. We're going to try and look into it, but there doesn't appear to be any decent reason given. That's made publicly available, and like you say, it's a backward step. With all the stuff in the news about the BBC and all these other places, and women's rights and equal pay and all that stuff, and I don't want to get into that. But with all of it going on, you kind of think, how have they slipped? How have they slipped under the radar? How is it okay to say, we're going to keep paying men, but we're not going to pay women anymore? It's like a big company saying, hey, we've made a decision to get rid of all the female staff. Can you imagine?
Jesus. Yeah. Do you know what? It's as ridiculous as it sounds. It's not actually that far off.
Well, that's kind of what it is, because it's if it's a professional sport, then that is their job. They are employed by the RFU, and now they're not. They've just basically all been given the sack. So I don't get it. I don't get how it's okay to do that. But I'm sure that there are. I have no doubt that it's not breaking any laws. I'm sure that the I's have been dotted and the T's have been crossed. But yeah, to the average Joe like you and me, it seems very wrong. And I think with performances like these, it just strengthens that argument to sort of say, look, why is there not more exposure? Why is there not more investment? They should be putting more money in, not taking money away, because clearly women's rugby is on that kind of cusp of being something that can really take off, and it would be a shame to lose that, and it would be a shame to lose the talent, because if in 3 years' time or 4 years' time, whenever the next World Cup is, England are nowhere near the top, we're going to look back and we're going to say, well, this was entirely affected by making these changes. We've only got ourselves to blame, the RFU rather, not ourselves. And it would be, it seems crazy, but We'll see. We'll see what happens. Obviously, the Sevens team are still professional. Maybe they'll get around it by saying that they're going to employ them all as Sevens players.
I doubt that. I can't imagine many of the front row are going to be on the payroll for the Sevens squad. But I mean, it's something you and I have spoken about a lot. So both sort of on air and just amongst ourselves. And hey, what difference is our little pod going to do? But it's something we've said, and guys listening, we're going to be following the Red Roses, outside of tournament as well. And any updates we will 100% bring to you, because we're a massive believer in them. We're massive fans of them, and we're going to be following them and keep shouting that message. And we encourage everyone else to do so, because they deserve it. They really, really do deserve it. And we're going to be a big champion of them and try and drive that agenda as much as we can. And we maybe even Andy will come up with some sort of hashtag, which is his area of expertise. But
Dan's still learning what a hashtag is, so
yeah, I'm still not entirely sure how it works, but I'm starting to get there. Well,
look, let's leave it on that note. It's obviously great for the girls what they've achieved. Hopefully, they continue to do this. Hopefully, they'll just go from strength to strength on the Sevens circuit, and who knows, maybe this time next year or this time in 2 years' time or whenever it is, after the Commonwealth Games and the various Sevens tournaments, we'll see the RFU backtrack, and hopefully they do, and come next World Cup, hopefully we'll have a professional setup again. But we shall see. We should keep our fingers crossed, and as Dan says, we will do what little we can to champion that going forwards. But we're also here to talk about the England men's, and a good place to start with that is, I think, to look at the Premiership, because it was a pretty big opening weekend.
What an epic weekend. What an awesome weekend to start. I mean, from the Friday night when, I must admit, Exeter Gloucester, I was like, okay, done. And bloody Gloucester won.
I know, it's last minute try.
Yeah.
I didn't see it, but I did hear that Gloucester's second was a bit controversial.
I think there were a couple.
TV match officials said yes, but apparently it was a clear double movement. Did you see it?
So I've seen it. I've seen one clip. It looked a double movement to me. I haven't analysed it, and there was also an argument for a sort of forward pass. I believe it was Rob Baxter, and I could be wrong here, but certainly one of the coaches said he's seen, in both instances, seen them given and seen them not given.
Yeah, I guess the thing is they were 21 apiece, in the dying minutes, and Gloucester nabbed it at home, and that's a pretty close game, and from all accounts, it was one was leading, then the other was leading, and it was very much kind of all the way through. It was pretty close. So
yeah, but it's I mean, I guess from our point of view, more than anything, we probably want to look at the sort of impact from the England players' perspective. It is hard this weekend because there's still obviously quite a few Lions to be rested.
Yeah.
But there were a few key points I wanted to actually bring up and ask you. So Saracens, let's face it, absolutely destroyed Northampton.
Yes.
They ran in 9 tries. It was, quite frankly, it was a demolition job. I mean, to a point where, let's not get carried away after one weekend, but to a point where I'm thinking, are Northampton in trouble this year? Are they in a relegation battle? Which seems unthinkable a few years back, but it could be. So 2 points for this that I've got. We've recently just done the awesome foursome with the second row. And another area we've brought up is obviously Hooker and Dylan Hartley as captain. Let's focus on Dylan Hartley now. If he's playing in a team that are losing week in, week out, that's got to affect his chances of firstly being England captain and secondly actually being an England player, especially when we look at sort of Jamie George and what he's achieved with the Lions. Now, fair enough, Jamie George wasn't playing this weekend. He's still been rested. But, Dylan Hartley's opposite number, Shout Brits, had his hand in 5 of the tries that they scored. I'm not saying this is Dylan Hartley's fault, but if he's playing in a team where, other hookers are shining, he's not due to, the fact that as a team they're not performing, that's got to impact his chances, right?
100%. If that is the case, I think you have to kind of take a step back and say, well, look, they've had an absolute shocker. It's not something we typically see from Northampton. Do we expect to see it again? Probably not. But, we're going to need to see a few more results before we can, I think, go down the road of saying they're going to have an awful season, they're losing everything, and the Empire's going to have Hartley. However, so something interesting. So in 2015, Lee Dixon took over the captaincy at Northampton from Dylan Hartley, who then subsequently in 2016 took on the England captaincy. He's just been made Northampton captain again, Dylan Hartley.
Yeah.
We don't see many England captains who are also captaining their club sides. Quite often, when we have an England captain, someone else takes over the club duties.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's been some conversations going on behind closed doors, and this is as a kind of reaction to the fact that maybe Dylan Hartley's days as England captain are more than numbered, less than numbered, whatever the saying would be. And actually, maybe we're going to announcement's going to be made for the autumn internationals that there's a new England captain.
I just can't believe Eddie Jones would have shared that yet. Certainly not with.
Well, he hasn't.
Not with Dylan Hartley or with Jim Mallender. So obviously, it was Jim Mallender's choice to make Dylan Hartley captain. And I just, in their head, I get what you're saying. And in their head, he may be thinking, I don't think Dylan's going to remain as England captain. But I don't think that would have been confirmed. I don't think Eddie Jones would have confirmed that.
No, no. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It seems strange, but it just, I don't know. It just, it sort of slots in with everything we've been saying, doesn't it, about Dylan Hartley's future with England. And in some ways, I'm a big fan of Dylan Hartley, but in some ways, it would make a number of decisions much easier, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah.
A new England captain, a new space available for hooker, and we know exactly who slots into both categories. So.
We certainly have our views on it. Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Something else that's interesting, I guess, semi credit to Northampton is that at half time it was 41-3. So although they did get destroyed, it was 55-24. So they clearly
that's like when carry on.
I was just going to say they clearly something. Sarries to me are not the sort of team that says, "Oh, let's take our foot off the gas." Because we've already won this. They're not that kind of team.
But it's like the other week when it was All Blacks versus Australia, and after 48 minutes, the All Blacks are leading by 48 points, and then Australia come back, and you change your mentality. I'm not reading too much into that, because although, like you say, Sarries won't sort of, won't consciously take their foot off the pedal. Sort of, Northampton have nothing to lose to play a bit more expansive game. And they still let in 9 tries. It was pretty poor. Northampton, it's not panic stations yet, but if that's not a massive wake up call, well, bloody hell, they really need to start looking at it.
Well, they've got Leicester this weekend.
Yeah, it doesn't get easier, does it? I mean, Leicester,
which is probably what they need. They don't. The last thing they want is to go and have an easy game and potentially have an upset against a team that they should absolutely never lose to. Leicester could be a much better test for them, and a way, I think, to just sort of put this result behind them, because even a loss it isn't the end of the world, but a decent game, a good close game, I think makes it easy to put this one behind them and just say, right, move on with the season.
Well, if they lose badly, they're in trouble, because firstly it's a local rivalry, so you want those matches to have that intensity and to be a bit close. And secondly, like we're saying, purely from a sort of England player perspective, which is obviously the angle we're looking at it from. And I mentioned Dylan Hartley, but the same for someone like Courtney Laws, Harry Mallender as well. Like some especially somebody on the cusp. I mean, Courtney Laws is a bit more maybe embedded, but it may affect, like, if it comes down to it, and Eddie Jones is thinking, well, who am I going to pick? Am I going to pick Cruz, who's won the last 8 games in a row, or Courtney Laws, who's lost the last 8 games in a row, for argument's sake?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're saying, but this is one of the problems that we have with this awesome foursome decision, though, isn't it? Is that there's always going to the chances are there's always going to be an Itoje Cruz pairing that are doing incredibly well in the Premiership.
Yeah, although Itoje, I've got to say, was something that I said I hope doesn't happen, is Itoje was playing back row for Saracens this weekend.
Okay.
So, yeah, he was playing 6, Which
well, I mean, look, that potentially would solve our England dilemma as well, because then there's room for the awesome foursome.
Yeah, exactly. That could be.
And back row, as we've said, is one of those areas where yes, there's a kind of a first choice, but
there's room for change. There's room for change there, definitely.
And there's not a lot. No, I say there's not a lot. What's then there in the background is very much the youngsters coming through, the Curry brothers, and the like. So I think there's definitely opportunities in the back row if Itoje can find a way to be as effective in the back row as he is in the second row. And I think that's the key thing. He is so effective in the second row. We don't want to lose that.
Yeah.
So the next one for you then. So this is looking at the Wasps Sale game. So Wasps beat Sale 50 points to 35. England have... So in scrum half, England have pretty much two choices. It's been the same two choices for quite a long time now. And there isn't any obvious kind of additions at the moment. You kind of feel like
agreed.
Ben Young starts, Danny Care's on the bench. Perhaps vice versa, but that's the way, Dan Robson scored 4 tries from scrum half for Wasps at the weekend. That's the kind of scrum half that I want in and around the England setup.
Isn't he Kiwi?
Is he?
I thought so. We need to check that. I thought Dan Robson was Kiwi.
I need to look it up now, because if it is...
Yeah, look that up now, because there's one Robson who's Kiwi, but yeah, somebody saw him 4. But whilst you're looking that up...
English professional rugby player, plays for Wasps in the English Premiership.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Oh, maybe I was thinking of no one. Yes, no, you're right, and that's great, because we probably do want those sort of people coming in and putting that pressure on. But yeah, 4 tries, that's a hell of a return, isn't it? Whilst we're on that match, because Sale are another team that, fair enough, Wasps like to run in points, but there's a couple of players amongst the Sale, like sort of carrying on from my theme about the Northampton, because Worcester took a bit of a beating as well, which may have impacts on Ben Teo, although probably less so due to the nature of his game. But
also Ben Teo plays for Worcester, and I think the fact that he's been selected for England despite playing for Worcester, Worcester aren't one of the teams that's going to really challenge the Premiership. So
yeah.
He's being picked anyway, just on individual performances, isn't he? That's how he's found his way into the England setup. That's how he's found his way into the Lions setup, not because of how he plays as a team or within the team. So yeah, I think he's probably an anomaly when it comes to looking at things from that perspective. And I think Eddie Jones, he'll definitely look at all his guys in the same way. But you're right; it would be very interesting to see a Ben Teo in a winning side.
Yeah, it would. And from a Sale point of view, you look at that. So obviously you've got the Curry brothers there. I don't think Sale are going to get walked over week in, week out, so I don't think that matters a huge amount. But who may be sort of starting to worry a little bit would be Denny Solomona. I mean, he's got not just from performance perspective, but from sort of behavioural perspective, he's got some making up to do. So
yeah, I mean, he's
not nailing it. Yeah, but I mean, if he's not nailing it week in, week out and looking great, which, if you're not in a winning team is a lot harder to do,
100%.
His job of getting back in that setup becomes more difficult.
Yeah, definitely. Well, look, we're looking at all these games. We said we wouldn't, but we've almost done them all anyway. So just very quickly, Irish turned over Quins 39-29. It's a 10-point win.
What a result for them.
So that's a great result for them. Leicester Bath. This was the first away win that Bath got against Leicester since 2003. And they did it. Yeah. And they did it with 13 men for like the last 10 minutes.
So I didn't see this game. I mean, I've read about it, but I didn't actually see it. And I mean, from what I understand, Leicester made some fairly poor mistakes. I mean, it wasn't necessarily an awful performance, but they made some fairly silly mistakes. It was against the run of play. There was like an interception try. One thing I took out of that match, if I'm honest, is Manu was on the score sheet.
Yeah, that's exactly what
I saw that.
I'm still convinced. I'm still convinced that Manu Tuilagi is in Eddie Jones's mind, he's on that. He's certainly on that squad sheet.
Is, yeah.
I was talking to my old man about it, who has a habit of just being your archetypical grumpy old man. And I was like, so what do you think about this whole thing with Manu Tuilagi? What do you think? What do you think is going to happen? And his response was, I'd just drop him from rugby.
Drop him from rugby.
He went out for a few beers, and you ban him.
You're no longer human.
Yeah, you did used to play rugby, right, Dad? You remember how you used to go to the bar afterwards? Yeah, but I wasn't a professional. Okay. But so anyway, we wouldn't do that, Manu. If you're listening, we would put your name on the team sheet. We would ink it in right now because, as Eddie Jones says, this is a guy that can take apart the All Blacks.
He is. He is.
Yeah. Well, he's done it before, and he's going to be key if they want to do it again. I think or at least to have that option. I think that the thing with a Manu Tuilagi is just having him in the squad. Or even having him in the matchday squad means that opposition have to be prepared for two, and especially given what the alternatives are, it's two totally different game plans. So how do you prepare for that? Eddie Jones is very good at kind of looking at the team he's going to play and preparing a game plan based on the team that they're going to play and the type of rugby they like to play. But if England have the ability to go, we're going to play a sort of a very tactical kind of game with two or three playmakers in the midfield. But if we suddenly decide that this isn't working, we have the ability to bring on someone like a Manu Tuilagi and have a completely different game plan that involves punching holes. It's very difficult for the opposition to defend against that, or at least to prepare for it.
It is, and it's difficult for us to also because I mean looking at selection perspective. So say you've got Ford Farrell, which I think is probably likely. And then 13. Do you start with a Manu? Do you start with a Tio? But for argument's sake, you start with a Joseph. And then there's probably only room to select one of Manu or Tio, who are two of our form centres. Well, okay, Tio's one, probably our form centre. Well, and Manu, if he gets to form.
Let's have a think. So if we're saying that you've got, sort of Youngs and Kerr, because how many? Yeah. So Young. So the starting would be Youngs, Ford, Farrell. We're then saying a centre. And then obviously the back three, you're looking at Watson, Noel, and Daly.
Daly, yeah.
Yeah. So you're going to have Danny Kerr in, or at least another scrum half.
Yeah.
You don't need a fly half replacement because you've got Ford and Farrell there already. You've got three at the back that can kind of interchange, but you're probably looking for one more sort of back three player. Would you think?
I would think so.
And then you have a third back replacement, so that's your centre. You have three replacement backs. So scrum half, a back three, and a centre because you don't need a fly half.
Okay, so let's say for argument's sake it's Ford, Farrell, JJ.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So then you can either have Tio or Manu on the bench in that situation. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying.
One may miss out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're looking at JJ versus Tio.
I assuming Manu plays well.
I think I just think Manu, even if it's on the bench, as I said before, it offers that thing. Tio, we said yes, he's a big guy and he's a big runner and he can make big hits, but not like Manu Tuilagi.
No. He's not running for it.
But also he's more of a playmaker. I think JJ is the one in most trouble there, actually.
Yeah, I want to. I haven't seen him play. I do, but JJ offers something different to those two.
He does,
they're all different players.
But someone like a Watson can step into the line or a Daly can step into the line and kind of cover that role. So if you've got a Tio or a Manu at outside centre, a Watson or a Daly can come in on his outside or his inside and kind of create that JJ role. So I think JJ's probably, on the basis of what we've just talked about here, probably the one in most trouble.
Yeah. No, I'm inclined to agree with that.
At the moment, as things stand, obviously. But like we've said all along, this is week one. And I suspect if we're going to do this each week, I suspect we're going to be changing our minds every week as well, because the performances are going to come in and they're going to be a little bit different each time. And as you say, a lot of the Lions boys being rested still. So we'll
that's
see.
when it gets interesting.
Yeah.
That's when they're all back. But yeah, no. It was. I mean, I think it was just something definitely worth, because you know, the first round of matches, there was no one, I think, from other than, with the exception of Dan Robson, there's probably no one else who sort of suddenly said, "Hang on, I want to be an England player this year."
No.
But yeah, let's keep.
But like you say, it's early days. There will be others that put their hands up.
Of course,
there'll probably be others that have to pull their hands down. But we'll definitely keep an eye on those. And Dan Robson, I think, he deserves to be on our radar with a performance like that. So as Dai Young said, England, it's harder and harder for England to ignore him now.
Yes, yeah. That's a very fair point.
So yeah, we shall follow that one closely, and we'll keep you informed. And obviously, if he finds his way into the England setup, we'll all know about it soon enough. So that's probably a good place to call time on this week's episode. Again, apologies for the delay in covering the ladies' final. We've done it now, and we will continue to keep an eye on them. Premiership's underway. Week 1's out the way, and results are in. Been a few shock results. And it'll be interesting to see the impact it has on the England setup. But guys, thanks for listening. Keep listening. Head over to iTunes to subscribe to the episode so you never miss anything. Rate us, review us if you get an opportunity. That would be great. You can also download the episodes on Acast if that's easier for you. And it also enables you to listen to them online, which is simple if you're not using podcast apps. Check us out on the website, www.englandrugbypod.com. Get in touch on social media at England Rugby Pod. We're on Twitter fairly regularly, so if you've got anything you want to tell us, any stories you want to share, any kind of feedback on what we've been talking about, anything you think we've missed, please get in touch, let us know, because we want to make sure we're talking about the stuff that you're interested in listening to, rather than just banging on about the stuff that we're interested in. So yeah, do let us know.
Excellent, guys. Thanks very much for listening.
Take care.